Congo rebel leader claims he is Laurent Kabila's son, and the current DRC leader is not. A bizarre twist in the coup plot case is our top story tonight. The man handed himself into South African police, saying he is Etienne Kabila and was planning to oust President Joseph Kabila of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have a report.
Also ahead in the program, the going could get sticky for the French in Mali. The UN says the government is hesitant. We get the French government view live here in the studio. And it's the economy and guns. President Obama targets home issues for his second term. And choosing poverty over piracy. The film about Somali youngsters that's up for an Oscar.
Good evening. The Congolese coup plot took a bizarre turn today as police in South Africa charged the alleged ringleader. He claimed to be Etienne Kabila, the son of the assassinated former DRC president Laurent Kabila. He also said the man now in power, Joseph Kabila, is not his son. The DRC government dismissed the claims.
Now, as expected, the DRC government did dismiss the claims, but the man who says he is Etienne Kabila handed himself into police. He is now charged with leading 19 others in the coup plot. David Glencorse explains.
Etienne Kabila will appear in court again tomorrow in Cape Town, accused along with 19 other Congolese of plotting to overthrow the government in Kinshasa. Prosecutors say he's the leader of the UNR, a group of around 9,000 rebels who want to remove President Joseph Kabila by unconstitutional means. Etienne Kabila claims he's the president's half-brother, but Kinshasa has denied any relationship. The UNR say that elections 2 years ago in the Democratic Republic of Congo were fixed. Certainly, the result, bringing Joseph Kabila back to power, was met in many towns and cities with protests. International observers described the whole election process as lacking credibility. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been hit by numerous rebellions throughout Joseph Kabila's 12-year rule. The alleged plot is in some quarters being linked to another rebel group, M23, which is said to be backed by Rwanda.
It is too early to be linking them with any coup. We cannot say at the moment whether they are linked with M23 or not, but as our investigation unfolds, we'll have a lot to tell.
Tomorrow, prosecutors are expected to outline the case against Etienne Kabila and his 19 co-accused. It's alleged that they were attempting to buy weapons and secure military training to overthrow the government in Kinshasa, all to be financed by mineral concessions. David Glencorse, Arise News.
Guns, the economy, and the climate, just a few of the many key issues U.S. President Barack Obama tackled in yesterday's ambitious State of the Union address.
The President of the United States.
Our economy is stronger when we harness the talents.
The U.S. President's annual speech to the nation focused squarely on domestic priorities. He mentioned North Korea's recent nuclear test and the simmering crisis in Iran. But it was the economy that Americans are worried about. President Obama said more jobs are being created and called for a rise in the minimum wage.
Tonight, let's declare that in the wealthiest nation on earth, no one who works full-time should have to live in poverty, and raise the federal minimum wage to $9 an hour.
2 months after 27 people were killed by a lone gunman's rampage through a Connecticut primary school, Obama urged congressmen to settle the gun control issue once and for all.
Each of these proposals deserves a vote in Congress. If you want to vote no, that's your choice. But these proposals deserve a vote. Because in the 2 months since Newtown, more than 1,000 birthdays, graduations, anniversaries have been stolen from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Gabby Giffords deserves a vote. The families of Newtown deserve a vote. As some states have ever seen, we're all just
He promised that half the U.S. troops in Afghanistan will be home within a year. And he threw his support behind developing wind power and solar power, along with cleaner natural gas to power the world's largest economy.
We can choose to believe that Superstorm Sandy and the most severe drought in decades and the worst wildfires some states have ever seen were all just a freak coincidence. Or we can choose to believe in the overwhelming judgment of science and act before it's too late.
The address is President Obama's best chance to speak directly to Americans early in his second term. Joining me on the line from Washington, D.C. is Michael O'Hanlon, Director of Research for Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. Michael, thank you for being with us. I think we heard all the familiar themes that we've heard for quite a long time from President Obama last night. What was your overall impression of the State of the Union address?
I thought it was fine. You know, going back to Clinton, these States of the Union in the modern form always strike me as a bit of a laundry list of a lot of things, and I don't think they carry a lot of rhetorical punch for that reason because they're sort of unfocused. They cover so much. But now that I've come to expect that, I think that the president did a perfectly solid job of articulating themes that are on the minds of Americans, the focus on the economy, the focus on keeping the deficit under control, the focus on a balanced approach to deficit reduction, and things like immigration reform and gun control. And foreign policy essentially being relegated to a relatively secondary domain. I think all these things were predictable, made sense. The Afghanistan decision is about what I would have expected as well. It had elements of strength and resoluteness because we're going to keep our forces pretty much where they are through the summer, but then also an element of trying to bring the war to a conclusion, as the president emphasized in saying that he would cut quite a bit within 12 months. So that, like many other things, was sort of par for the course, and I did not find it a particularly surprising speech. I don't know how much political good it will do him in the end, but it was sort of a standard State of the Union address as the modern era now defines it.
As you said, there was that laundry list of all of those usual suspects, if you will. Anything not there that you think should have been there? There was no mention of war on terror, no mention of Iraq. What do you think was missing?
Well, I think it would not have been realistic to expect a big new initiative, let's say, regarding the war in Syria, where I do think American policy probably needs to shift and needs to become more assertive, along with that of other countries as well, not just the United States by itself. But one area where I thought perhaps there was an opportunity might have been in trying to gain more leverage in helping Egypt and Tunisia and others that are struggling through these revolutions, sort of in the second phase, a little bit slower and uglier phase of their revolutions. And while I think we have to keep the pressure on Egypt and not give it carte blanche, I'm not sure if the international community is offering enough economic assistance to get it through a very hard time. And if we don't help the economy get back on its feet there, I'm worried that we could see more radical forces become more empowered. And so that's an area where perhaps an international fund.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I want to jump in on that point before you move on to something else. As it relates to aid to those countries that are in turmoil in northern Africa, the president said, and I quote, "Through a range of capabilities, we will continue to take direct action against those terrorists who pose the gravest threat to Americans." That seems very vague and ambiguous to me. Is it vague to you as well?
Well, yes, but not surprisingly so. I mean, obviously that encompasses everything from special forces to flying in French forces into Mali to helping local governments with greater capacity themselves, perhaps even some intelligence operatives, perhaps some drone aircraft. I wouldn't have expected him to itemize those technology by technology and program by program and country by country. But I think you're right, it was deliberately vague.
Michael O'Hanlon, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I thank you so much for joining us and for your perspective.
And to the business news now, in Kenya, oil in the spotlight. Our economics and business editor Michael Wilson has the story. Michael, it's all about Tullow, Tullow, Tullow.
It is indeed. The future of Kenya's energy production has caught investors' attention today. Exploration company Tullow Oil released encouraging test results on its wells in the country. It says the report could lead to Kenya's first commercial oil production. That news overshadows Tullow's $671 million write-down to account for unsuccessful drilling. But 2012 profits were broadly in line with analysts' expectations. Energy companies could also be on track for a boost in demand this year. OPEC now says the world will consume more oil in 2013 than previously forecast. The cartel has upped its estimates by 0.3%, citing China as the main driver of growth. OPEC accounts around 30% of global crude output. Its members include Libya, Algeria, Nigeria, Gabon and Angola. Barclays unit in Kenya's posted an 8% rise in pre-tax profit to just over 13 billion shillings or $148 million for 2012. The positive numbers were helped by a drop in bad debts, which fell almost 2 million shillings to 3.8 billion shillings. That's $43 million, and an increase in good debts. The bank says it will pay a dividend of 1 shilling per share, 11% more than 2011. Now, in the equity market, South Africa's main index snapped 2 days of losses. Stocks climbed 0.27%. Doesn't sound a lot, but it's not bad these days. There was positive sentiment in Kenya as well. Over in Nigeria, the NSE slipped into the red. In currencies, the rand strengthened against the US dollar, hitting a one-week high. Although retail sales slowed, the data was much better than economists were expecting. Meanwhile, the naira and the Kenyan shilling, little changed. Now, in commodities, oil fell slightly after the International Energy Agency cut its demand outlook, which rather tempered the optimism about the global economy, which has helped push the price up to its highest level in 9 months. The IEA's downbeat view of 2013 contrasted what I just told you about OPEC, which we quoted earlier. One leading analyst said today that the oil price wasn't justified by fundamentals and it should be $8 to $10 lower. Gold slipped in thin trading following a decline in stock markets as investors hugged the sidelines before this G20 meeting in Moscow later this week, which is expected to give clues on currency policy. So, critical times for the South African economy. Retail sales figures were out this morning, and tomorrow President Jacob Zuma makes his State of the Nation address. I spoke to Chris Hart, Chief Strategist at Investment Solutions in Johannesburg.
I think clearly what it's saying is that the households are coming under increasing pressure in terms of their disposable income. The economy, last year was to extent no real problems when it comes to actual earnings. I think the December bonuses would have been paid. There weren't any sharp job losses that had to be dealt with, small job creation through the course of the year. And yet we only had a very small growth in retail sales. And that suggests that although wage increases were higher than the stated inflation rate, you'll find that the retail sales are not really reflecting that. And I think this may well be reflecting the limitations of the government's economic policies. They're trying to drive economic growth through building infrastructure. Now, we know infrastructure is essential for economic growth, electricity, for instance, water, etc. But it's being capitalized through the cash flow, and so electricity prices are being raised very rapidly. Everywhere where there's infrastructure built, cash flow is being used and prices are being raised. So whether it's electricity or airport charges or freight charges, it doesn't really matter. The rates are well above inflation, and that's busy sucking resources out of the household sector, where there's additional tariffs. We're looking at a tolling system, for instance, on the highway. That the toll doesn't take away existing taxes on fuel, for instance. So it's all additional burdens that are coming onto the household, and this is feeding back into retail sales at the moment.
OK, now talking about the State of the Nation, what will President Zuma, do you think, say tomorrow? What does he have to say?
Well, I think he's got a difficult balancing act, because there's the social demands, the poverty that we face in the country, but there's also the need to actually generate investor confidence, that without investors there is no solution. And investor confidence has actually been dealt quite a blow in recent weeks. And in a sense, derided in a sense in many instances. And so South African risk has shifted quite a bit to weakness. When we look at the last 5 years, in other words, the duration of the Zuma presidency, following the Mbeki presidency, we've seen a distinct deterioration into, the Mbeki presidency was characterized with improving credit ratings, improving jobs, for instance, and high growth levels. In the Zuma presidencies, we've seen lower growth levels, deteriorating credit ratings, and job losses. And that means that we're not actually getting the economic policies right. The budget deficit, instead of a budget surplus where we left off in 2008, we've now got a budget deficit that's quite big, and the welfare spending is busy rising to a point where it's not really sustainable. And investor confidence is an absolutely critical dimension. We also have to try and sort of balance where we're getting mixed messages. Zuma's message, for instance, at the Mangun conference, that's the ANC conference last year, outstanding. His message at Davos, outstanding. But you've got other messages at home which really annuls these messages completely. And that needs to be actually bedded down to try and understand that we need to get policy certainty. The policy needs to become more supportive, and it needs to become more realistic. We need to be focusing on not so much on what exists, but what needs to come into existence to resolve unemployment problems in South Africa.
Chris Hart, thank you very much indeed. That's it from me just for the moment. Still to come with Valentine's Day tomorrow. Find out how Madagascar is cashing in on our cravings for chocolate. See you in a few minutes.
All right, Michael, thank you so much. California police say they have found a body in a burned-out cabin where murder suspect Christopher Dorner is believed to have made his deadly last stand. Jerome Evans has this report.
The search for him lasted for 6 days. But it seems that this is how the hunt for Christopher Dorner ended, in a hail of bullets. The former policeman is believed to have barricaded himself in this cabin and exchanged fire with SWAT teams. One officer was killed and another injured during the gunfight. Police fired tear gas and urged the gunman to surrender. When they sent in a vehicle to rip down the cabin walls, there are reports that a single gunshot was heard inside the building. And then this. Flames engulfed the cabin in Big Bear Lake, a ski resort about 80 miles east of Los Angeles.
At this time, we can't even confirm that Mr. Dorner is in that cabin. They have not made entry into the cabin, so there's no verification even though there's a body in there. So at this point, I can't tell you whether he was shot or not, because we can't confirm that there's a body in there.
So you still cannot tell whether this body belongs to Mr. Dorner or not?
Correct, because we don't know if there's a body in there or not.
Police launched a massive manhunt for Dorner last week after he allegedly killed a couple and a policeman and injured another 3 officers. The disgruntled ex-cop had posted threats online to murder police officers he blamed for his sacking 5 years ago. 50 Los Angeles Police Department officers and their families have been placed under special protection. Officials had offered a £1 million reward for information leading to Mr. Dorner's arrest. Authorities say it may take days before they can officially determine whether it was indeed Christopher Dorner's body found in the ashes of the cabin. Jerome Evans, Arise News.
Now for more on that story, our Washington correspondent Colin Campbell joins us live. Colin, real quick on this shooter story. It could take up to a week, experts say, before the body in the cabin is identified. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's because the body was very charred. This was something that Dorner may have set up before police actually got into the cabin. That's what some experts are saying right now. They may have to look at Dorner's dental records to identify him. As you can imagine, if his body was indeed engulfed in flames, it would be badly charred, and they wouldn't be able to tell who it was just by looking at the body. They would have to look at dental records to identify him.
Colin, we're going to get back to the State of the Union real quick, but I have to ask you this question. Has anyone claimed the $1 million reward yet?
No, not that we know of. As far as we know, the reason why police were able to locate Dorner into that cabin was because they followed clues. Remember, they saw the burned out truck that belonged to Dorner just outside of the Big Bear Lake Resort and the San Bernardino Mountains. They followed him in. There were large numbers of police sent in. I believe more than 100 police officers were sent to that area to scour the area with bloodhounds. Some even talked about the use of drones. That was in dispute, that the Customs and Border Protection used some of their drones to locate Dorner. That was later said that that may not have been the case. That's still very much up in the air. But what we do know is that a lot of resources were delegated to finding Chris Dorner. And so far, no one has claimed that $1 million bounty reward.
Okay, Colin, on to the State of the Union, and I guess gun control. It got several standing ovations from the packed house, did it?
Yeah, as we can tell, as we know that Washington stands very divided right now between Democrats and Republicans, but this was one of the very few issues where both sides seem to somewhat agree on. And the reason why I say somewhat is because the devil is in the details. We do know that both sides agree that there should be background checks, perhaps a federal registry, perhaps a limit on the amount of ammunition that gun owners should be able to buy at one time. But there is that gray area where some people believe that semi-automatic weapons should not be taken away from gun owners or people who would want to possess semi-automatic weapons if they are believed to be of sound mind to possess guns. But at the same time, we did see Republicans clapping and applauding the president when talking about gun control. It did tug at the heartstrings because he discussed Sandy Hook and Gabby Giffords, a congresswoman who was shot in the head and later recovered, and talked and spoke out in Congress about the need for more gun control in the U.S. This was all part of the president's discourse in his State of the Union, and a lot of people resonated to what the president was saying.
And I guess a lot of experts and analysts will be dissecting the State of the Union for the next few weeks. Colin, thank you so much for joining us. Colin Campbell there in Washington, D.C.
Well, moving on to Mali. Mali risks descending into catastrophic violence, according to the United Nations Human Rights Chief. After 4 days of suicide bombing and guerrilla attacks in the north, fears of fresh attack are high in Gao. Stores are shut. French and Malian forces have pushed Islamist rebels out, and today they patrol the mostly empty streets. But residents are watching the river Niger closely for the sign of rebels' return. It is a fragile situation for France, and you have to wonder, what will they do next? To shed some light, the French embassy spokesperson Javier Chatel joins us live here in the studio. Javier, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You know what? Tick down through me the list of objectives that France has to achieve in order to be able to pull out and leave Mali.
Look, Debbie, I think it's very important to start first with the simple point that this was not a war of choice, it's a war of necessity. And we had three main objectives. The first one was to stop the attack of terrorist groups that were basically dashing to Bamako to thwart the political process and install at the heart of Africa a terrorist state. And this objective, we believe, has been achieved. There was a second objective, which was to allow the Malian forces and the Malian state to recover the full sovereignty on the whole of the territory. And we're not entirely there yet, but we're almost there. And the third objective is basically to facilitate the deployment of African forces, of the African-led AFISMA. This is the ECOWAS force, also with components of Chad. And this force is going to take over basically from French forces.
Yeah,
and this is underway.
Xavier, I guess you have to think about the fact that French forces will be there for the long run. It's not going to be an easy war to pull out of. You must be taking that into consideration.
Well, I think we've always said very clearly that we were not there for the long term. We will leave as soon as possible, but we will stay as long as necessary.
I wonder what the sentiment is like in France. Is this still an effort that is supported by the French public, by the French people at large? And I also wonder, how long will they be patient? having French troops in Mali?
Well, Debbie, it's a very important point that you're raising there. At the moment, I think the amount of support that there is in France for the operation is very high, and people are aware of what it means. They know that it's an operation, a military operation. They know that it's difficult. They know the risks which are associated with it. But I think they have really understood that we had to do it. It was not a choice, it was a necessity. We couldn't allow terrorists to have a state and to topple the legitimate authorities of a friendly country.
There are critics there who say that Mali could end up being France's Iraq. We're seeing suicide bombers now. At least we've seen one so far. It could be more. Is there that fear?
I think you have to look at the broader picture. Before we intervened, there was already a political process which was underway. There was already a UN Security Council resolution. There was already an international effort. There was already a unanimous support in the UN Security Council for deployment of African forces and finding a political solution. There was already the EU, which had decided to deploy a force to train the Malian security forces. So all of this international apparatus was there, and there was a great deal of international support. So the solution was already underway, but the terrorists tried to thwart that international effort, and we prevented them from doing so.
Quickly, before we're out of time, you talked about the objectives in order to be able to pull the French troops out. I wonder if there's necessary to change the strategy to address this sudden resurgence of violence that we've seen in the last few days.
Well, then again, if you look at the broader picture, there's no city which is being held by terrorists. We have been making a lot of progress. We're now to the northern reaches of the country. The African forces are now more numerous on the ground than French forces, and we're leaving aside Malian forces. African forces are more numerous than French forces. So the main objectives that we're trying to reach are on the way to be achieved, and we are very grateful for the international support to that effort, because it's very strong.
All right, Xavier Chatel, thank you very much for your perspective.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
You're watching the News Hour here on Arise. Our top stories this evening. Police in South Africa have charged the alleged ringleader of the Congolese coup plot. He claimed to be the son of the assassinated former DRC President Laurent Kabila. A senior United Nations official says the government of Mali is hesitant over the deployment of a UN peacekeeping force. And in business, OPEC is predicting that the world will consume more oil this year than it had previously forecast, mainly due to China's increasing demands.
Also ahead on the program, we'll tell you why Togo's taking on the world, get this, at skiing. You are watching Arise News. Thank you for being here with us. We want to go back to our top story, and that is the unrest that is in South Africa. South African police have alleged ringleaders of the Congolese coup plot. Olivier Kambala is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he joins us live, I believe, via Skype from South Africa. Mr. Kambala, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. I appreciate it. This is quite a convoluted and confusing story. So let's just start with background. How did these 19 people end up being taken into custody and being accused of this coup plot? Can you just give us the background?
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. I must say I'm a human rights lawyer, so I'm going to actually take a totally legal angle to the analysis I'm going to make on this particular event. The reality being that the Hawks, which is a special force, a special section of the South African police, has made the arrest on 19 Congolese last week in Johannesburg. And then, I mean, the people have been arrested in Limpopo, a province where they were allegedly conducting training, conducting military training. And they were then presented to a magistrate in Pretoria last week for their first appearance, in which they were supposed to apply for bail. but their bail application was suspended because they were lacking proper legal representation. So last weekend, Friday, it was the arrest of the one who is supposed to be the ringleader of the coup plotters. So basically, he's supposed to be presented before a judge, and also, to have a process starting. We've heard that he did not plead, he did not get into a plea bargaining, so he did not plead guilty. So there actually should be a process, a trial should actually take place. This is basically how the people, the 19 plus 1 men have been arrested. And the charges the South African police are laying forward charges in violation of the anti-mercenary law, but also anti-terrorism law. The anti-terrorism law in this country is a very old apartheid type of legislation that was used to actually clamp down on the ANC, the African National Congress. And now in modern South Africa, I would say that law is a little bit of a problem, because I mean, you'll remember in August last year when about 30 miners were shot at a mine in Marikana, in the exploitation of the Amplat company. It was again an anti-terrorist law that was brought forward. But this law is a little bit an outdated law that South Africa is still using to actually clamp down on apparently any form of dissent. But the problem with the 19 people who were arrested in Limpopo is that for everyone who is very familiar with the South African landscape, you will know that there are white supremacists who conduct military camps in different places in the country. They conduct military training, they have guns, and they've never been arrested on the basis of that particular law. So the question now is to know exactly what prompted for those 19 Congolese to actually, to apply the toughest interpretation of that legislation.
All right. Mr. Olivier Kambala, thank you so much for being with us. We do appreciate it. And please give our best to that sweet baby we hear in the background there. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Nigeria's Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala says Africa must seize the opportunity to make up for lost ground in the 1990s, the so-called lost decade. Ms. Okonjo-Iweala told me she's convinced Africa is on the right path now, but that the continent cannot afford to rest on its laurels.
I really think that the continent has crossed some kind of corner or some kind of bridge, and that this is the time. But we Africans need to really seize this moment. And what I'd say is I'm not sure we're seizing it to the best advantage that we can. But it is Africa's moment. I also believe that there are some people left out there who have not yet realized that it's our moment. Why is it our moment? It didn't come just like that. It's not a fluke. The reason it's Africa's moment is because for 2 decades, at least 2 solid decades now, we've been implementing good policies on the economic front. We've also, on the political front, solidified several of our democracies, had several elections now. I think 33 countries have conducted elections more than once and handed over power peacefully. And with that sort of governance shaping up, and with the economic performance, I mean, remember in the 90s, when Africa was seen as a lost decade, everybody gave up. It was a case for aid.
Yeah.
Now, we're talking about investment. We're talking about macroeconomic stability. The fact that inflation is down from the hyperinflation of 47% in the 90s to about 9% now on the continent. Yeah. Exchange rates are stable, reserves are being built up. So there's growing confidence that you know, Africa is doing the right thing. And let me just say that the future looks bright, because we've got a set of policymakers now who now recognize that what they did in order to stabilize is important and must be sustained. So on the back of that, and on the opportunities that are opening up, I really feel very hopeful. Finally, let me end with one more thing that makes me feel that this is Africa's moment and will be sustained. When you look at the pattern of investment in African countries, you see that emerging market countries are investing. Other developing countries are investing more and more in Africa. Even Africans are investing more in themselves. You look at investment in Nigeria, some of the biggest ones, like in telecoms, come from South Africa. Yeah. You look at the cement industry in Africa, the biggest investments come from Dangote Industries of Nigeria. Yeah. The banking sector from Nigeria investing elsewhere. So if Africa invests in Africa and other emerging markets invest, we don't have to think only of investment from the West or from developed countries, because we, southern countries, will invest in each other. And I think that has come to stay. So that's why I'm very up. All these achievements we have must be sustained. And we shouldn't really rest on our laurels, on our oars, and say now we've made it. We've not. Because the continent also faces enormous challenges. The reason why I keep being optimistic is because if we solve those challenges of infrastructure, continued governance, good governance, that means that we keep solidifying our democracies. We fight conflict, because each time there's a conflict on the continent like Mali, it mars the rest of the continent. So we must keep reducing the number of conflicts on the continent, put in the infrastructure to buoy our economies, and continue to fight corruption both in the public and private sector. I think if we focus on those very specific things, Africa has the future is really ours.
That's Nigerian Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala talking to me there at the World Economic Forum in Davos recently. Debbie.
Thank you, Jeff. Beyonce has put the lip-syncing controversy behind her and premiered a new documentary about her life. The singer directed the 90-minute film, which she gets personal about her thoughts, miscarriage, and pregnancy.
Thank God for my computer. Sometimes when there's no one to talk to, I talk out loud so I can get all of my thoughts out and try to figure out the issues that I'm having, and I'm trying to find the answers.
Beyonce through her own eyes. The autobiographical documentary called Life is But a Dream takes a no-holds-barred look at her life. It developed from personal conversations she had with her computer over the last 2 years. She was on the red carpet to premiere the 90-minute documentary, which she also directed. In it, she gets personal, discussing her miscarriage, pregnancy, and firing her father as her manager.
I felt like it was time, but I felt like I had a story to tell and hopefully some people to inspire. And I really grew so much. This movie has been like therapy. I've healed from so many wounds, and I've been able to understand why some of the things I've been through, why I went through them. So I feel really proud, and hopefully that can inspire other people.
Beyonce is hoping that her ultra-revealing documentary will someday provide insight for her one-year-old daughter, Blue Ivy.
I hope that she will see all of the beautiful times, all the tough times that led up to her being here. And I'm hoping that she will always have it and it can comfort her and inspire her in her life when she needs it.
Beyonce was supported by some of her celebrity mates, including Oprah Winfrey. The talk show host made a rare appearance on the red carpet. She watched the film with students from her school.
They came away saying, oh, she's just like us. She has feelings just like us. I mean, the whole trying to grow and learn to trust yourself and gaining your own independence, that's what every woman goes through. We just didn't know Beyonce did.
So I cry and I cry and I say, love me, love me.
Beyonce hopes the documentary will give her fans a true insight into her life and thoughts. It will air this weekend. Nat Lowe, Arise News.
Time now for a roundup of some of the other stories in the news today. Zimbabwe's election chief is stepping down. Simpson Mutangabenengwe is blaming ill health for his resignation. His decision comes as the country gears up for a constitutional referendum and general election later this year. Two French charity workers are both facing 2 years in jail after being found guilty of trying to illegally smuggle 103 children out of Chad. Eric Breton and Emily Leloc falsely claimed the children were orphans as they tried to bring them to France. And Uganda has deported British play producer David Cecil, who staged a production there about homosexuality last year. The Ugandan government is currently considering a law that would increase the punishments for same-sex relationships.
And it's time to check on the latest money moves with our economics and business editor, Michael Wilson. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Debbie. On Wall Street, the Dow Industrials Index now declining after hovering around the 14,000 mark yesterday. The S&P 500 has also reversed some of its earlier gains. Traders are weighing up the implications of President Obama's State of the Union speech last night. Well, for more on that, let's cross live to our US business editor, Andrew Schmertz in New York. Well, let's talk about that address. We know about that dramatic hike in the minimum wage. We know about this dreadful word, which I know you love, sequestration, which we'll come to. What did you make of it economically? Did he do the business?
Well, first, the president is proposing a significant increase in the minimum wage to $9 an hour from the current $7.25. And so is that good news for people? Well, it depends on who you speak with. The White House says that it will help 15 million Americans by putting more money in their wallets, and that will help the economy because they'll go spend that money. However, businesses say that every time you raise the minimum wage, it actually ends up costing jobs. And one study by the Employment Policies Institute says this specific hike would cost about 400,000 jobs. Now, it's a good question as to whether the president did the job or not, because he has a lot on his plate. And for this minimum wage hike to go through, he's going to have to put a lot of muscle behind it. And the first thing on his plate, though, is this March 1st deadline for what you called sequestration. It's what we call sequestration, actually. Now, if you go to the dictionary, you're not going to find a definition for what this means in this case. Basically, what happens is if Congress doesn't pass a budget by March 1st, and Congress hasn't passed a budget in the last few years, mandatory spending cuts are going to go into effect, totaling $1.2 trillion. About half those cuts are going to fall into the defense industry, and the Congressional Budget Office estimates that about 750,000 jobs could be lost because of this. So whether the president got the job done or not, it remains to be seen.
I'm sure we'll follow that over the coming months. Now, a big media deal involving NBC Universal. Is it changing hands again, and how?
Well, what's happening here is Comcast, which is the nation's largest cable operator and already owns 51% of NBC Universal, has agreed to purchase the rest of the network for $16.7 billion from General Electric, which wants to get out of the entertainment industry. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, Comcast is a distributor of content, while NBC, which owns the broadcast network, many cable properties, as well as TV and movie production facilities, produces a lot of content. And what's happening here is companies are merging together to both control distribution and control the creation of content, and this deal may put pressure on other media giants to go ahead with similar measures.
Andrew Schmertz, thank you very much indeed. Andrew Schmertz, our US business editor there in New York. Now, heavyweight stocks trading ex-dividend dragged on the FTSE 100, outweighing gains in miners, as Britain's blue chip index continued to struggle to convincingly clear the 6,300 level. Choppy trade, too, in continental Europe, contrasting results, for example, a bigger than expected loss from the French bank, Société Générale, and forecast beating figures from Heineken gave a very sort of mixed picture, really. Now, lesson number one for policymakers: never shout loudly that there's no problem. Yesterday, a G7 statement designed to calm worries about a currency war had completely the opposite effect. It provoked fresh worries and spooked the currency market. Sterling took a fresh tumble after the UK's central bank governor predicted slightly higher inflation and more sluggish growth for the British economy. The pound has so far lost 6% against the euro since the beginning of the year. As I said, Heineken, the world's third largest brewer, beat expectations for 2012 with a profit of €1.7 billion. That's $2.2 billion. The company says Asia, the Americas and Africa are driving growth, offsetting weak European markets. Heineken, which also makes Sol, Strongbow and Tiger, sold 3.6% more drinks in Africa last year than it did in 2011. Now, from beer to another indulgent treat. It's chocolate. Valentine's Day, just a day away. Many people are betting a nice box of chocolates is the way to their partner's hearts. And for those looking for something a bit more upmarket, made in Madagascar seems to be the way to go. Sarah Hemranjani reports.
Just the sight of melting chocolate is enough to make your mouth water, and many couples are hoping its reputation as an aphrodisiac will do the trick on Valentine's Day. As people the world over hunt for the perfect bar of gourmet chocolate for the 14th of February, this factory in Madagascar is working round the clock to meet soaring demand. The island nation is home to some of the world's finest cocoa beans, which are said to have a distinct and fruity flavour.
Est aromatique. Vous avez des notes florales, vous avez...
Malagasy chocolate is aromatic. You have floral notes, you also have a hint of acidity with a pH level of around 4.7, a strong astringent taste, which makes this a premium chocolate from a premium cocoa bean. It's a highly sought after variety because of its floral notes and aroma, which are uniquely and exclusively found in the Malagasy cocoa, which makes it very rare.
Que vous retrouvez uniquement et exclusivement dans le cacao malgache.
But that rarity means customers have to dig deep into their wallets. Because of the small size of the cocoa crop and growing popularity, Malagasy chocolate is considered a luxury by the local population, not an everyday treat. In fact, most of the chocolate produced here is exported to countries like the US and Australia, where shoppers are willing to fork out a little extra for a taste of the exotic.
This chocolate is excellent. It's on par with other chocolates that you can find anywhere, whether in Europe or anywhere else.
For the Sinagra Chocolate Company in Madagascar, that seal of approval is welcome news. It's expecting to make more than $1.3 million in overseas chocolate sales this year. Sarah Hemranjani, Arise News.
2/3 of the world's cocoa comes from West Africa.
Correct. Ghana and Ivory Coast.
Indeed, so Ivory Coast responsible for half of it, so it's a big thing for them. So that trade needs to continue, actually. Are you buying chocolates for your loved ones? Are you?
Well, this is my question. Where is the chocolate? You
That's
cannot show us a
It's not Valentine's Day yet. It's coming. It's arriving.
Technicality.
The postman's going to sprain his back bringing all your chocolate up here tomorrow. Right. It'll be all right.
Now.
Don't worry, she's off, isn't she? She's at the bit, champing at the bit.
She's on a binge chocolate.
Okay.
I need my chocolate. All right, Mike, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'll get over it. You know, we're used to bringing you stories about pirates on the African coastline. Now, a new short film is depicting the plight of those forced to consider piracy as a way of life, and it's in line for entertainment industry's most coveted award. Will Took reports.
It's less than a fortnight to go until the 85th Academy Awards ceremony in Hollywood. Alongside the usual slate of blockbusters battling it out for an Oscar, the South African-produced film Assad is also in the running for a Golden Statuette. Nominated in the Best Live Short category, the film tells the story of two Somali boys forced to make the choice between a dangerous life of piracy or an honest but poor living through fishing.
mogta odag inuu una kan jeclan wuxuu aaminsan kalluumaysatada kalluun qabto maraakiibtan say soo qasban lacag madax foosho ah waa ninka kaliya Soomaali sidaas wax u dareysan waa laga yaabaa laakiin ninkan waa jecel.
Assad's two young stars were able to draw on real-life experiences during filming. Brothers Harun and Ali Mohammed fled war-torn Somalia with their family in 2004. The film's producers discovered them living amongst the growing Somali refugee community in Cape Town.
That story of that film is me and my sisters and my mother. We surviving that movie. So there's no food. Sometimes there's food, but sometimes there's no food. There's people who killing the people, and we stay next to the sea. And then I fishing. I learn how to fishing.
Now that filming is over, Harun and Ali are learning English with the support of the filmmakers. They say they'd love to take a break from their studies to attend the Oscars ceremony, but diplomatic hurdles stand in the way.
Passports are very time-consuming, even for a regular South African citizen. For a refugee, the timeline's even longer. 5 months to 2 years is the wait time for that. We're trying to get it done in a much shorter period.
As the boys wait to find out if they can go from the streets of Cape Town to the red carpet of Hollywood, their performances promise to bring the everyday struggle for survival in Somalia to new audiences across the world. Will Took, Arise News.
Now, Jan Gilbert is the founder of the film site Flicks in the City and joins us live in the studio. Jan, apart from a feel-good feeling, and, you know, this is, I guess, portraying Somalis in a completely different light, what chances does Assad have at the Oscars?
Well, it's a tight race, I think, at the Oscars this year. Obviously, there's 5 films nominated for the Best Short in the live action category, which this is. But I think it stands a very good chance. It has lots of things in its favour. It's got very strong performances from a young cast, great direction, beautiful cinematography. It's got a touching story, but it has a lightness to it, but it doesn't shy away from the harshness or the brutality of the life that these young kids lead and the crossroads that they find themselves at, a choice between piracy and fishing. So I think it has many things in its favour. So I'd say it has quite an edge on the other titles that it's up against.
And you've seen Searching for Sugarman, which is another one of the nominees.
Yeah.
Tell us about it and what you like about it.
Searching for Sugarman is up for one of the best documentary, so a different category. Again, it's a category with 5 different films in there. It's very different to the other films in the category. I think it stands a very strong chance. It's a great film. It's about a guy called Rodriguez. He's a singer. He was a singer in the 70s, a writer of songs, and he was a guitarist as well. He made a couple of records. They were actually quite popular, but they never actually sold very well, so he kind of disappeared into obscurity. And he has a massive following, not that he knew at the time, in South Africa. He was hugely popular, like Elvis Presley or something. It was amazing. He never knew anything about it, never saw any money from the records or anything. And there was various stories about what happened to him. Did he disappear? Did he die? Various kind of apocryphal stories that happened. Anyway, 2 guys kind of wondered what happened in South Africa, followed the story, tried to trace it back to a website, have you seen Sugarman, where is he? Followed the leads back and actually found that he was still alive. He hadn't fallen off the face of the earth. And then he couldn't believe it, that he was so popular in South Africa. It was another world to him. You know, he was in America, a different life. He was you know, a labourer. It was nothing to do with music anymore. And he came back to South Africa and put on some wonderful concerts. And he was hugely popular again. And people absolutely love him there, really, really do. Incredible story. If it wasn't a documentary, I don't think you'd believe it in a feature film.
You can't make it up, Jen.
Yeah, exactly.
More and more movies we're seeing coming out of Africa. A few years ago, Tsotsi was the big hit. Is this encouraging to see that there are more and more African movies and feel-good stories too about Africa?
I think so. I think it's very important that you see Africa in a different light. If you think, for example, thinking back to Assad, a story about young Somali kids, it's important that you see things shedding a different light, putting a different face on things. It's not just that Black Hawk Down picture or the soon-to-be later this year, the Captain Phillips story from the piracy incident. But, you know, you see a touchingness, you see a sense of humour, you see a resilience, you see a resourcefulness of the people and a potential of refugees as well. I think seeing all those different sides we don't normally see perhaps in news reports, which is focused on maybe the warlords, the piracy, the famine, because that's all the kind of life you have access to. We don't have access to the everyday existence of people there.
Right. Jane Gilbert, we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Now, for a roundup of the stories from the world of sports. 2 of the giants of European football face off in Spain this evening. Manchester United take on Real Madrid in the first leg of the Champions League last 16 in just a few hours. It is the first time in nearly a decade the 2 teams have played each other. The Tour of Oman has a new leader. Slovakian Peter Sagan is now in the red jersey after leading a 4-man breakaway from the rest of the pack. He's now 9 seconds ahead in the general classification as the cycle race approaches its halfway point. The Japanese Wrestling Federation have said that they were given no warning and no explanation that the sport could be dropped from the Olympics from the 2020 Games. Now, joining us in the studio, as always, our sports reporter Ife Fatunase. Ife, that story is not going away, is it?
It's not going away. As you say, the Japanese were very angry about it, but it's not just the Japanese that are angry about it. It's actually caused problems for sports federations across the world. They say they've been given no warning. Wrestling is a very popular sport. Now, it's all happened because yesterday the IOC decided to vote against having wrestling as the list of one of their core 25 sports that are always in the Olympics. So from 2012, it looks as if wrestling will be no more. The final decision is not going to be made until September, but it's pretty much very likely. Now, the IOC has said wrestling is very popular. It's been in every Olympics bar one since 1896. So it's, you know, does very well. But the IOC said they knew this was going to happen, and they've had to come out today to basically try and appease everyone to explain why they've had to get rid of wrestling. And the president himself of the IOC had to come out today and had this to say about the matter.
I must say that we knew even before the decision was taken that whichever sport would not be included in the core program would lead to criticism from the followers of that particular sport. Again, the vote of yesterday is not an elimination of wrestling from the Olympic Games. I want to be very clear on that. First of all, wrestling will participate in the Games in Rio de Janeiro. So to the athletes who train now, I say continue training for your participation in Rio. And I'm saying your federation is working towards the inclusion in the 2020 Games.
Well, we'll see what happens with that. But it was a tough night last night for the Celtics in the Champions League. What happened?
Well, yesterday when I spoke to you, I said Neil Lennon, the manager of Celtic, had told Juventus not to underestimate them. Unfortunately, they didn't bring it because they lost 3-0 to Juventus, which is a bit of a shame. The other game was Valencia Paris Saint-Germain, so that was a good game. Paris Saint-Germain beat Valencia 1-0. But the big news of the day, David Beckham, my favourite player of the world, he was out training with his team. So yesterday he watched the match, he wasn't playing, but we can see he turned up with his teammates in Paris Saint-Germain today, had a bit of a training session with them. So they're hoping that he'll be fit by, they've got a league game on Sunday, and then hopefully back for the replay of the Champions League. But he looks fit enough to me.
He looks pretty good to me too. And so you think he'll play on Sunday then?
Well, this is what today's session was all about, so to see how he gets on. So we have to wait and see if he's selected for the team on Sunday. But I mean, Paris Saint-Germain have to prove that David Beckham was not just a show signing. They need to prove that he was actually signed for football reasons and not just for marketing reasons. So Sunday will be an indicator of that.
Yeah, big game tonight, Effie. Yes. The big one. Cristiano Ronaldo faces his old teammates, Man U, Real. It's a big one, isn't it?
Yes, it's the big reunion. So Manchester United head over to Real Madrid. They'll be playing them in the first leg of the Champions League. Alex Ferguson, manager of Manchester United, has said this is the one everyone wants to watch. There's another match on later, but we don't really care about that. It's all about Real Madrid versus Man United. So I don't know. It's a bit of a shame this is not the final, because it'll be quite a good final to watch. But you know, hopefully, it'll be good enough.
All right, Ife Fatanasi, thank you very much. We'll have to see if Beckham is going to play.
That's right, this weekend. So. Your favorite player too, huh?
Well, you know, he's pretty nice.
In his underwear?
No, he's a good player.
Okay.
Stay elevated. Stay elevated. Africa's mostly warm and dry climate is not the best for skiing, but Togo, for the first time ever, will compete. Well, can I finish my sentence?
Go ahead. I'm
in this year's Nordic World Ski Championship.
That's right. Arise's News' Adrian Smith has this report on Togo's first winter athlete.
27-year-old Gervasio JJ Madja is preparing for the cross-country leg of the tournament. Most of the Northern European competitors have been on skis for decades, but Madja's only been training for just 2 months.
I felt like a newborn boy who hadn't seen anything yet and who couldn't do anything on his own yet.
Madja came to Germany when he was a 16-year-old to play European football, but 2 torn Achilles tendons killed off his soccer career. Tony Hittmar is the German ski trainer who suggested Team Togo join the competition, and he has an eye on an even bigger goal.
Togo has never before participated in a Nordic ski championship, let alone the Olympic Games. That's why we are very ambitious to offer something to that country which never before existed.
Madja's first tournament starts next week. Adrian Smith, Arise News.
And finally, nearly 5,000 Thai contestants are celebrating after setting a world record for the most people dancing with hula hoops.
Look at that, 4,483 people swung hula hoops to dance music for 7 minutes without interruption. Wow, that's impressive. Here's the big question. Jeff, can you do that?
I was going to ask you that, Debbie. Can you hula hoop?
Back in the day, I could hula hoop. Now, I don't know so much.
You know who I think could hula hoop?
Michael
Wilson.
He does look like the hula hoop kind.
Do you know what? When it was fashionable in the 50s, I remember I tried. I looked a complete idiot. But you know, it actually the hoop itself was first seen in 5th century Greece. On their carvings, you can see the hoop.
And then you just know that off the top of your head?
And then Native Americans used the hoop in part of their worship. And then you don't hear a great deal, and then it surfaces again. This is serious. In 17th century Scotland, as the Scots, you know, were trying to move away from England and everything like that. And they were doing exercise.
Michael, that's a lot of hoop talk.
All right, good night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow, same time.